Thank you very much to also have a chance again to talk at the AA and to talk indeed about housing, which was from the start a very important topic for our office. But things did change over the past, I don't know, we started in the early 90s indeed. And I will also try to tell you a little bit what I have a feeling is going on, because things are not getting easier in times of neoliberalism, I must say. But then again, maybe there are also all kinds of new opportunities nowadays that when we started as young architects were not available. So there's always different perspectives, but maybe we can talk about it afterwards. I will share my screen now with you to start.
You are enabled, yes.
Yes. So seeing my first image, I think, living indoor outdoor. Yeah, I had to think of a title, and I think what has always, always when we are designing, when I'm designing apartments, houses, there's somehow more than ever important is this interaction between the house, the apartment, and the city. And in current times, of course, it has even become more, most people have become more aware of how vulnerable and precious this relationship also is. Yeah, here's some images from our office our head office in Rotterdam, with people in it, but I must say now I'm sitting on my own in a very, very empty building at the moment. Everybody's working from home, as most of you are probably. Yeah, and the work I will be showing today is, of course, a collective achievement. I'll be showing some work that I'm closely involved in, but also some work from colleagues. So bear with me if you ask very complicated questions. That I may not be able to give you all the last details, but for the sake of the discussion today, I thought it's important to show it to you. Yeah, like I said, all been going through these strange times, and I made this picture for a lecture some time ago, but it's very interesting that the choreography of how we meet each other has already so and the arrows anymore. Almost, when people pass each other, people already start to take a distance and kind of move around each other in a very particular way. So we've internalized within a couple of months already this new geography in space. It's very fascinating. Right, so I took the chance, indeed, Lawrence already talked about typology. I sort of loosely connected a couple of our projects, some originals and some newer stuff, indeed, via types. That's with housing still an interesting thing to do, I think. But it also reminded me of the fact that we are getting that the boundaries are getting vaguer between what is what exactly in housing. Well, let's see how this layout has worked. I thought, in any case, always good to start always with the private house, because it says something, of course, about what architects think and feel. And also traditionally in our English, in our British lectures, our only English thing, we're working in Glasgow now, but the only realized project so far is this balancing barn. An interesting project because it was done by Living Architecture, an initiative by, amongst others, Alain de Botton, to prove the British that it would not be so bad to live in a contemporary house by offering these holiday homes made by contemporary architects in a contemporary way. Fascinating experiment. Wondering what the follow-up of that has been so far. you need to inform me about this rather than that I can talk to you about the current situation. In any case, it triggered us because we had quite a large plot on which an old barn, the derelict farm, was demolished to still play with that type. The pitched roof, something that returns in our projects more often. I think it's sort of the house feeling, the idea that there might be an attic. But also this idea that how close can we push the house to the view, and how far away can we get it from the main street? And this sort of sketchy idea of maybe we can push it across the boundary and make it exposed and unexposed in an unexpected way, which immediately leads to quite a intriguing question, of course, about structure. And these kind of something which is very important for the house is the whole arrangement of the structure. And since I'm talking to a lot of architectural students, I imagine this is of vital importance as well. And what I think is very, very interesting about this structure is that it encompasses the shape completely. There's the volume, the idea, and the structure are really one in this particular project. So yes, there is a kind of an idea of an ideal home being made. It's in a way it's simplified to a sort of iconic section of this shape with a pitched roof. On the other hand, it's an extra tall house because it should house a large group with multiple families. And there's also this excitement of the contemporary house by pushing literally a boundary, and that is pushing it towards the edge, the extremity of construction, because that's also part of our thinking about architecture, is that you can create even with the simplest shapes more and exciting spaces just by also the way you position them in space. In this case, a space underneath the house, a space inside in which you will feel the tension of this house, which is always slightly moving, even if you want to stand at the end near the living room here. And it's also shown through a glass floor. And then there's, of course, this sort of swing, not sort of, it's a swing where you can actually hang under this house. And so here I'm revealing to you, of course, the structural idea. And then it's covered in wood as well on the outside and the inside. And then there's a shiny cladding that reoccurs in more of our project, also as this idea of how, in a way, the building can also reflect again and try to dissolve it in its. Although it has a big size, it also tries to disappear again. So it's a highly conceptual project, of course, and it was also supposed to be like a visiting card of what contemporary architects can do, of our ideas. That was definitely also a challenge, and that's how it has been made. Oh yeah, here you see. Until today, this is under construction. The outside is finished. The interior is being constructed right now in Rotterdam. A depot building, also cladded. In this case, in coated glass, in a space in nature where you would maybe even prefer that nothing is built in a park, in a former park. And also this building that had to be quite big as well tries to, at the same time, disappear and create space at the roof. In this case, a new little park on the roof has been established in a building that's predominantly closed because it's a depot. Anyway, back to the private house, and it's almost as if this private house turns into an apartment. There's also things I can attribute to at the in the current time. You see, the bottom is also reflective. It reflects the surface of the earth, and it is sort of other space created on the side. A house intended, actually, it's a holiday home for people to be outside also a lot and to wander around, look out and in, move out and in. A lot of the doors are sliding doors so that you can, from as many as possible rooms, go inside and outside. Also something important in this world, so that you can create, that you can diminish the boundaries and have a sort of freedom of interaction between this inside and the outside. Same for view. So here you see the arrangement where you enter from the right in a large living kitchen, then the individual bedrooms of the guests, and then you're walking towards this living that is hovering above the ground. The interiors have been made by Studio Makking in Bij, with all kinds of nice panels based on Dutch landscape paintings. Lots of Dutch design furniture also was included. And the wood also gives a certain intimacy, again, to the whole situation. There's furniture from Makking in Bij as well. And this extends into the living room. You see the glass floor. You can make a choice whether you want to be looking at it or cover it, because there's this puzzle tiles. If you think it's too scary, you can detach yourself from it as well. Inevitably a fireplace, of course. And then there's also this idea that you beam into the nature with this, and it's all surrounding you for roof lights and all these windows, but also at the bottom of the house. So privacy maybe is an important topic to talk about as well. And in private houses, this is even more interesting to deal with. It's interesting in apartments, but it's also interested in villas, because you usually go to quite extremes. There's one hand the interaction between the family members, but then the other thing is the relationship with the street and the exterior. Here in a villa project not far from Rotterdam, individual plots were sold. Most people bought these catalog houses that were put there, a sort of fake distant memory to the Dutch 30s, when nice brick buildings were made, and now this bit ripped off versions that are built often of poor quality. Our clients bought two sites, actually, but they were also quite exposed, and had this narrow garden and therefore at the back. And what we did with them was that we sort of carved out a new outdoor space inside, where an olive tree was put because of the Greek roots of one of the family members. And then you suddenly had this sort of introvert space possible, where actually the whole house could be opened up without losing too much privacy. And on the other side, it actually deliberately closes off itself, and it has this mosaic window where outdoor and indoor are filtered, and you sort of slip in through this front door porch here. And part of the houses in the area are actually in a white modernist style. That was another thing that was allowed in this neighborhood, because there are some 20s modernist houses built here in this neighborhood as well. So as you could say, a obliged choice of style even for us. The bricks are glazed and white. Again, the Greek past, the Greek history and the Dutch somehow intermingled here. Modernism and the White House. So here you see it from some other places. It's also this sort of free-flowing floor plan, of course, where rooms are connected to each other and organized actually through this outdoor space. The indoor is organized as well. And on the top floor, the bedrooms and bathrooms of the family as well. And here again, floor to ceiling doors and windows, so that on one part the house can be completely opened, and every room has this relationship with outside. So you could say that's a deluxe version of this idea. Not so long ago, some friends of us also asked them to help them, and they bought a plot with an old office building. Where we deliberately closed off parts of that other house. In this case, we're confronted with 3 sides of the building already being completely closed. So this is the original floor plan. Only the front side towards a little street had openings. The 3 other sides are blind walls, and there's some roof lights. It was a derelict building from the 80s with some additions, bad state. But the owners thought it would be good to try to reuse this. And for us, this is also a good challenge to not just throw away everything and demolish everything, but try to actively reuse as much as possible of the existing in this building. We're entering new times, of course, when this is really very vital that we start to think in this particular way. So some parts of the structure. It was also quite complicated, because what kind of possibilities do you have if you have such a deep building with such a little amount of windows, living really inside the neighborhoods as well. So here you see that what we did is that there were some tiny openings as well inside. We completely opened that up and turned it into one big new patio, and aligned all the rooms around this new patio. And there's also a practice in the house of one of the family members who works from the house. So that was also incorporated in the floor plan. So we used the original heights. We used a large part of the original steel structure. It was reinforced. The roof was renewed. Openings were largely kept. And this is the new floor plan that we made, where you actually enter and then you can see straight through this patio right away. And then the higher part, the original higher part, we created the living room. And then there's a sort of sequence of rooms. You can actually, of course, make a round, walk through the house if you cross through the practice space. And well, it's wonderful to see how you get this amazing relationship with the patio. I think that's something which will come back as well. It's not that much used, I think, not enough used, but under denser circumstances, probably one of the best ways to create indoor-outdoor feelings. Again, our trademark, big windows and openings, and in this case, with a lot of wood being used. And so the original walls and window openings are all covered again, and mostly use of color creates an atmosphere in the house. Again, with Mediterranean backgrounds, colors were picked together well under the guidance even of the inhabitants, what they preferred very much. So you see this now. Last summer, very nice space to be also in the quarantine situation, of course. And part of the old floors are still in that patio, so we kept a couple of areas where you can really put full-grown trees, and others are more covered and used in different ways. So here you see that's where and a lot of the materials here are actually recycled materials that have been used also in this patio. Yeah, I must say when I think of Britain, I also always think of somehow of the suburban house and the row house. I think that's something we have very much in common between the Netherlands and Britain, especially. But it's also something that sometimes I get a bit sad about, seeing that there's maybe not enough development in this way. It's still largely connected to cars. I think many years ago when we just started, we once made a kind of almost cynical project where we based a hypothetical plan just on the grid of the car park. And so it's this I don't know if you recognize it. You see here the car, and every module of the homes here in this area were basically multiplied car park sizes, and then it was just one blur between driving and living, with one hill in the middle under which we put a supermarket, actually. But the 3D images have gone. Have to dig into the archive again to find this way. But this sort of this relationship between the car and that house and that row house is a kind of major thing to always deal with, because of the numbers, because of the market, because of who's going to live there. So when we started, and maybe I've shown this 20 years ago, maybe not, but anyway, when we first were invited to actually be part of that, I mean, we realized that we had to deal with it somehow. You can say, of course, as younger architects, like, oh, not my cup of tea to be working in the suburbs. But so we stood out there and made a whole master plan for an area roughly defined by with this green interiors, this stuff here, and all of this. We made the master plan, and we also were the architects of some of the parts. And actually, this is one big playing with the car, as one could say. There were little row houses with an oversized garden with water in between. This plot I will show more. This one had sort of collective car parks with a fronts and then private courtyards. In this one, it was reversed. So you entered inside and the outside was private. And this is a whole block of patio houses. There they are. For those, because that's also something we discovered, like a lot of people who live in row houses actually fully cover their gardens in tiles because they don't like gardening at all. So actually it's the car and the garden that one has to deal with somehow in these areas. And of course, upcoming in those days was also densification. How can we compromise? These block and patio typologies are also researches into the density, the possibilities of densifying to be able to build more houses, because that was really necessary. And it is still, we have still large housing shortage in the Netherlands. So in plan, it looks then like this. So you see all the time this sort of interaction between the house, the garden, and the park, and the car park. In suburban areas, even often for two cars. I hope that will diminish soon. So in this particular neighborhood with affordable housing, parking the cars outside meant we could give everybody a larger garden. And that was fantastic. Of course. So although the house is not so big, the whole positioning of the house and this getting rid of all these streets inside the scheme allowed it to, for people to have larger gardens. This is shortly after the project was delivered, so the plants will be bigger now. But you could immediately see kids taking over. And again, these are not the, like I said, affordable houses, not the biggest houses, but all of them have windows again until the floor, so that this relationship between inside and outside and this sort of feeling that your space inside might be even bigger because there are no boundaries is very important. Also the covering it fully with one material also gives it a sort of abstract feeling where this endless repetition of small houses is gone. Actually, you look at blocks again and not at individual houses. And to its extreme, I would say, I have to speed up a bit as well, sorry. The other end of the spectrum was at some point like this division, house, car, garden. Can't we, there's a lot of abandoned agricultural land in the Netherlands because of the intensification and of other ways of organizing area. Near Newtown, not far from Amsterdam, the idea came up to create even more freedom to the individual homeowner by not planning everything precisely with all the statistics that was applied to the previous schemes I showed you, but to actually give us kind of maximum freedom. A plan called Freeland even, with the idea that you could achieve more freedom if you work as a collective. If you make decisions together on the land use, but not necessarily exactly as planned by a government organization or a housing association. By actually also thinking about sharing facilities with each other, but more on an individual basis. Well, I think the proof again, and so the calculations were that together you could create more freedom, but also more space while using it more effectively. And the givens in this area are actually that some of the main roads are made, but individual roads you can build by yourself. You can share them. You can also build them all by yourself. And the money you have, you can distribute as you like. You can spend it all on the road. You can also build bigger houses, or you want bigger plots. You were not obliged to use infrastructure, all the infrastructure that is normally automatically put in your place. You can do it together with friends or with a like-minded individual. And there is no forced grid on you beforehand. Well, individuals took up this challenge, collectives. Some people actually developed prototypes and tried to find users for it. And well, if you go there now, you can see all the different houses and experiments that people have made. Maybe under other circumstances in other countries, it's not so revolutionary at all. But for the Dutch, it was. I can assure you. And you see also that people experimented actually with building bigger houses with light constructions. Of course, experiments with all kinds of contemporary materials and recycling have been made. People are starting to realize their dreams around their plots, intervening with the transport systems and with the way traffic is organized. Some people use the opportunity to create their own grey water cleaning zones and deal with that. So this is like a long house where several families live together, and this is where they clean their water. So they were off the grid partially, etc., etc. So all these dreams could be realized in this neighborhood. Long talks about politics and ground price is also possible, but that's maybe for another lecture. I'm just continuing, because this maybe evolution or somehow development of the row house, at least in our repertoire, is also ongoing. I must say, in the past years, we were not invited to make them anymore at all. Often they are built by contractors from kind of catalog situations. So nobody's really waiting for architects anymore to further develop it, I guess. Well, of course, there are exceptions, but less and less. So in a weird way, we got back to the row house some years ago in an area that actually used to be a fake village for an army place. So it was just an area that looked like a village, but wasn't. And therefore, the army buildings were looking like row houses, but they weren't. A couple of them had to be reconstructed. That is, the original shape should be copied. We made a whole plan for that area, and as a consequence, we're also invited to make some of the buildings, including this one. I'm talking about three rows here up front. It's a tiny project. Again, we would normally maybe not been asked for it, but we thought, well, if it's a tiny project, we might actually be able to experiment again, because we haven't been able to experiment with row houses in a long time. Like I said, the shape was given. They were to be grayish, which was part of our own master plan and remembering of the army past. And we thought, let's try, because there's so little experiments yet to see if we can sort of make it very circular, reuse a lot of material, make it demountable, etc. All kinds of aspects of circular building. Let's try to experiment here, and probably people could be interested in living in such a house as well. So we went onto the market. That was the previous image to see what kind of materials are available. They are depending, of course, on second-hand material markets. We thought if we all give them a tone, a color, then we can also create this unity that is also needed. Well, it's still under development. I'm not completely happy yet with this image, of course. But the end of the story was that we would also end up with a lot of maybe material, like an assemblage of materials. And I started to think of a wonderful little building, A House for a Driver by Gerrit Rietveld, that is also an assembly of different materials. And got inspired by that to see if in this sort of wilder way we could collect all this collage of, I don't know yet what kind of materials we will do, and if people want more or less solar panels or green patches on their roofs. And while we're at it, let's differentiate. Also, the car parks are supposed to be underground because it's actually in the middle of a national of a very beautiful area. So, client asked to put the cars underground, and there you see. So, but should they all be the same? No. Well, maybe we can also change the sections, the floor plans, what people can do with their house. Maybe they can choose from different types of houses. So it's kind of this. We made many different variants of sections that people can buy into that might accommodate their favorite way of living. Actually, I won't bother you too much with it. Well, it's still under development. It's not the final shape yet. Maybe it's also not expressive enough yet. But I'll see. I'll keep you posted. The biggest experiment is even to make it work so far, because it falls outside of all kinds of guarantees that normally have to be given for these type of houses. Otherwise, people don't get mortgages, etc. So it's an adventure for us, but ongoing. And in the past, of course, we've been also trying to see how we can make a super dense suburban quality. At the time when people still thought it would be good that people in an inner city have two cars. So based on a grid of 18 cars and of 18 houses and actually 32 cars, this plan was made in Leiden, where we only created a section to densify. How dense can you build such a neighborhood? I'm thinking actually nowadays it would be good here it was in the inner city and the cars had to move inside. But why not try to do this now in our suburbs actually? Because why are these cars still on the streets in our suburbs? So that's why I'm still showing the project up to date, although it's already a bit older. Again, with individuals doing here even their own architecture inside. They build collectively blocks, but they can also invite their own architects. There's no coordination except among the people themselves who are building together. They have to fill the envelopes and have they are built back to back. So they have rooftop terraces, they have patios. They can do something at the front of their house. This is one of the architects, not us, who developed it in a fascinating way. It is a kind of half-half. Because they also were looking for proof of how we, if this master plan of us, we were the urbanists here, would really work. And one of the things we did to kind of sabotage a bit the townhouse was creating this split level idea, which here is used in a void space, actually. Oblige people to always make an open space towards this street, this car-free streets, because the cars are underneath. And here you see also how these roofs and these different balconies develop in this place. And if you go there now, 15 years later, indeed, all these streets have different different characters because the inhabitants were also able to choose their own plantings. They had to do that with the other block, actually, again. There's children playing everywhere. It's become very green, like a real oasis. And there's a lot of people hanging out on the streets. We also left out one block that's important as well. So this is the missing block where I found on a sunny day kids hanging out in the little park. And I don't know if I can go back to the master plan. But also what was important for us is that we created all kinds of different zones in this area. Little playgrounds where small kids can play, the streets without cars. And these are the streets with cars. This is a bicycle highway. Larger areas around the water where taller kids could play. This is this missing block with the park. The mini park I just showed you. So this whole differentiation of spaces, important. The street, different playgrounds, all kinds of organizations inside. Bicycles can also be parked under the houses. Sorry. Yeah, still relevant, I think, until today. And third typology, I will show you 4. The apartment building, of course. One of the original first buildings of our office was the block that didn't fit all the houses for elderly. Spectacular this side, where some of the houses are actually extended. The sound, the regulations for sound between apartments is so heavy that we discovered that the structure could actually carry the cantilevering houses. Didn't have to add much more than these steel columns here, and the rest is all pulled backwards to floors and walls. So this is kind of a well-known part of this house, but maybe lesser known is the fact that we also deliberately created these balconies in a sort of messy way, so that people somehow started to interact with each other. That was our idea. And we also had the colors. So there's a lot of same houses, but every house has its own little balcony with their own material, in a different connection with neighborhoods, to create this little element of your own identity in the sea of houses, which was very important for us. We even went through the complication of photographing every house empty and entering again when the houses were, people were living in the houses, to see what had happened. I'm sorry about the extremely low resolution, but it's published here and there to see what happens if you do these things with a house, the different window openings and the different colors. Tiny influence, and in the end, of course, this idea in the sea of apartments that you are making, can we still create individualism, or can we create different types of community with all kinds of means? For example, collections of different typologies, creating suddenly a platform shift going out of the building. How far can we go in structure to make lots of different types of apartments, as you can see here, without losing too much money, so that not only vertically but also horizontally all kinds of differences could be made. The relationship with inside and outside, and how it can differ if you make galleries, balconies, patios, double height spaces, voids, different types of structures inside a building. This is actually also a constant way of trying to make things happier, to have streets inside buildings, to create diversity, and through diversity, a more diverse community inside buildings as well. People who like to live close to the water, people who want to live up, people who live on one side but can go to this big balcony and see the other side as well, where joint events take place, as well as on the other balcony. So, and expressing that also through facades, through materials, through references even to other architects and styles and days. And then in the end, of course, you see the sort of densification of the Netherlands also coming back in our work, where we even start to create hybrids like the Market Hall, where the apartments themselves start to form a space that would otherwise maybe not been made. And a sort of technical challenge how to get to these apartments, to see if they can get connections to the outside, but also to the inside of the market. In sort of in a sort of mid-range apartments, couldn't get too expensive. The top ones are more expensive than the lower ones, but still halfway decent. You see the kind of regularity used to create this shape. I'm talking about it now from this perspective, but you see also here how in the inner city of Rotterdam things started to mix and mingle under the higher pressure, which is also nice because they're just building towers. But suddenly there's this other type of building with its unique identity as well for the people living there. This is actually going down into the lower parts of the building, and the archaeological findings exposed along the supermarket and the parking garage, and then high up the windows of people who can look into in the market hall. Again, a variation of patios, balconies, all kinds of interactions between inside and outside here possible, which then becomes, like I said, more complicated if we start to work with towers, and the constraints become stricter, of course, and stricter and stricter. And in this case, in this competition design for a tall building, which houses apartments, a hotel, all kinds of offices, restaurants, facilities. The Golden Bridge is a hotel, actually. In a way, what happened in the Silodam, you can see how the shape of this building creates terraces and roof terraces as well. That can be used in different ways, but also the outdoor space itself becomes a theme. It become a bay window, a terrace. You can see maybe other people. It can have different expressions, which makes your inside also different in this building. So not a monotonous repetition, but diversity and choices that can be made, and it also can impact floor plans, offer much more choices and varieties to inhabitants, and attract different kind of people. Therefore, what we know works so well in the Silodam, that it has a truly very diverse population inside as well, and even at some points these towers meet, and you have collective roof terraces as well. And there's bicycle parkings hidden in the core of the building. Like I said, there's interaction with stuff on below. Entrances can be much more bright and should activate, of course, also this area in Rotterdam at the waterfront where lots of high rises are built. So how can you make buildings that are not just fun to be in upstairs, but also are outward oriented at the lower levels where people are on the streets? Okay, let's move on because I have to talk faster, I think. Towers, more and more we are building towers. So sometimes because of certain constraints, it's also interesting to see that with actually this zone, this outside zone, you can vary the apartment itself and the identity of that space and the extra layers and roofs and platforms that you can create. And add extra attraction for the people living there. I'm moving on. This is a project, Masterplan again, where we are transforming old offices. Some of them are demolished, some of them are reused. Sometimes we use the parts of the building, sometimes just car parks. In Amsterdam, inside the ring, on the edge of allotment garden area, and an older neighborhood. We were actually able, because we had to use this interesting footprint and transform again to create diversity, because actually what we're now getting to is something more complicated, is that where in this Silodam project we could still make a huge array of different types of sizes and financial categories, we're now narrowing down. The programs are getting trimmed down. It's much more a certain type of 2-3 bedroom, 1-2-3 bedroom apartment, mostly 2, not more. Somewhere between 50 and 90 square meters, but also not more. So less and less a variety. So what can you do as architects? We thought we could actually do something maybe with plots. Maybe we can give the plots characters. These buildings on top of them develop. Let's see if we can make this a truly green area. When the cars move under the buildings, we can connect to what's happening around it. And Maas landscape plan by Gustafsson Porter Bowman, by the way, from London. Different architects have been invited here. And I think you can start to recognize how, again, this is sort of more or less a familiar, all apartments, all more or less the same sizes, but with completely different relationships on their plots with exterior, interior, orientation, balconies, facades. I like that very much. And also, you can then choose how you want to live and what kind of immediate context near your house can be very important, I think. Again, so there's different architects who are making this together. Each architect creates his own skin also, deliberately not all the same. On scale, the different plans, same scale, but all the different buildings we are making here, and you can sort of guess the different floor plans connected to it. You also see how they are having different interactions with each other. Sometimes they form a mini campus. Others are like blocks. There's a car parks underneath. You also see the differentiation in balconies and outdoor spaces. I think it's super important that we have this opportunity when we live in an apartment to go outside. This is an attempt where we put on an old office building a wooden structure on top of it, and we hollowed it out. This is under construction even currently. These are renders, but these buildings are under construction. So here you see again this sort of idea in the Sussex also of this extrusion of the facade and different relationships between inside and outside. And actually, I think next level for us would be to create high rises that are much more neutral in their use, that where if it's an office or it's a house, can be altered and changed. I mean, it's been done, but it means different floor to ceiling heights, maybe thinking differently about technical aspects of buildings. Let's say that's one of my next ambitions, is to see how we could do that. And so that also starts to translate itself into what does a building look like then? Does it look like an apartment, or does it look like an office, or is the difference diminishing between the two? It's a recent competition we did of a complex where there are offices and housing in the same complex. In Poland, we tried wooden structures, wooden facades as much as possible. We landscaped the plinth of that whole complex, introduced several balconies. Just one honorable mentioning, unfortunately, from the sea in Gdynia, it's in the northern coast of Poland, throughout this sort of suburban with a big shopping mall thing to more natural area, straight through our plot. So there you're suddenly sort of making a mini environment, which brings me also to the last group of projects of this, where offices and apartments start to share spaces, potentially also facilities, I would argue. And here you see, of course, we have a magnificent view at the top. But also this idea, are we still making very particular floor plans or buildings, or can we somehow create a more flexible future where things can change function more easily? And in any case, I think with the rise of ever denser inner cities, more high rises, also there should be a growing production, again, of community buildings, for example. They do that wonderfully in Denmark, we learned through this own building that we made, where there's all kinds of spaces that you can use differently in the daytime, in the evening, with where you can hang out, where you can learn to cook, where children can play when it's cold outside or dark, with some spaces surrounding it where you can meet. That should be part of the mixture as well. So that's also what I'm meaning with indoor-outdoor. We have all seen, until COVID, the more and more intense uses of libraries, for example, for kids to do their homework, to find better internet connections, that they will be dearly missing now, of course. But libraries as new hangouts, very, very important also to think about the additional programs and the removal of the car altogether by, and this project is, of course, it's in Seoul, is where a whole piece of highway has been simply taken out and replaced by park. So that's also something important to, you see the cars in the apartment buildings are shrinking. My clients don't even dare to build all the cars anymore, car parks anymore that cities demand, because they fear that these car parks will be empty, rightfully so. And like I said, this should move on further to the suburbs, where we also have to get rid of these cars in a different way, more and more. Last category. I hope I still have some time. So somebody should. Oh well, have to move forward fast. I see.
Nathalie, you're absolutely fine.
Okay.
You take the time as you wish.
10 more
That's
minutes.
absolutely fine.
Okay, right. Yeah, so this, I was talking about the apartment, sort of very basic thing, of course, in the city. Many people live in them. But then there's another new category, I think I will call the ensemble. It's where you can absorb even more functions. In your complex, you can maybe work in a block. And we can also argue about the categorization that I made. But I think in an ensemble, like this one, again, it's a bit playing with this hypothetical idea of, does it really matter what happens where? Shouldn't we build more buildings that have a certain neutrality and where functions can more easily be exchanged and used? Sort of vertical city idea. And then it's also interesting to add even more sustainable layers to that idea as well. So this is basically a high-rise project under construction, actually already at its highest point in Amsterdam, where cities started to realize that in the business district, the financial district, it was getting really gloomy. Nobody was living there. Changing that now, they're building many apartment buildings there as well. You can see the ring road of Amsterdam, the south edge here. Some more and more apartment buildings are added to the mix here to turn it into a real piece of city. And one of the projects is by us. And this building actually, I don't know if I can go back. Here you see it in a render next to some incredible soccer fields still present at the time. And this building has an exterior that sort of mimics a bit the office area, and then the interior is carved out, because it's also on a link between this business district now turning into real district and the inner city. And maybe it can also connect in another way, not just being built, but also being green, for example. This is the original urban layout that has been given to us, within which envelope we had to work. Different functions given that had to be layered at the bottom in this plinth. And then you see how that has been developed by Winy and his team in this case into something which is has this sort of following the guidelines. There, the building's also smooth and shiny, but then things start to develop in a completely different way, almost like a landscape. So this is like little hills being built there, and these are turning into balconies as well. Balconies that can be shared and balconies that can be individual. Yellow is the housing, and the dark blue is restaurants and bars, and all kinds of other functions can start to mix and mingle here. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be this sort of straitjacket where functions are mixed and mingled. It can also take completely different shapes. Again, this possibility of individuality, views, and balconies developing, of course, from this floor plan. As you can see here, also parametrically designed in such a way that they don't block each other's sunlight on their terraces. That's something I couldn't show you today. And then there's this sort of multiple platforms that emerge on the ground floor, but also inside there's this shopping area inside. It's hollowed out with daylight from the top. And you actually expand the site and expand the tough context still with lots of streets and cars into something which has a different atmosphere inside the building. You can see here also in light gray this cutout section where shops are, car parks underneath, but also other platforms for partly shared facilities, but also more private gardens as you go up. Covered with some solar as well, of course. And this is an interesting view from the top. The bird's eye view, rightfully so, I think. This in this case, a good word to use for birds, especially. And this sort of hybridity in the street and in the connections here. Very nice. Like I said, actually I reached the top already. Sorry, I haven't got a latest picture for you. Because in this ensemble, this interaction, interesting things and atmospheres can happen. This densification is, of course, our new task to handle somehow. And what can we do with it? We can maximize and optimize it, and you get this sort of crystalline shapes here in the inner city of Eindhoven, a city largely rebuilt after the war because it was severely damaged. Still some existing buildings also from the 50s and 60s that they want to remain. The yellowish parts, new ones, the blue parts. Daylight, very important between the buildings and the streets. That's why these carvings are made also to get enough daylight and sunlight in the complex. And these roofs, the pitch roof, also usable for all kinds of other things like solar panels and greenery, creating different types of houses, renewing the existing parts in the same fashion with more roofs on them. Like I said, creating differences in typology, also in the apartments, different spaces in between, little squares, streets, lively neighborhood. Cars are hidden underneath, as you can see here. And in these crystalline shapes, also these roofs and spaces start to emerge that can be used potentially collectively also in the project. This one is going under construction, I think, pretty soon. Winter gardens can be made because living under dense conditions it's also important that you don't just have a street and inside and garden or balcony, but that there's other spaces where groups and clusters of people can meet, people that live in the neighborhood, for example, or live in that particular building. That kind of diversity we need in our surroundings and in our society. Multiple escapes, potentially as green as possible also. One but last project. So because what can you do, for example, in North America in particular, this thing with the small apartments gets even into a worse case scenario, because they also start to make very deep and narrow apartments where you have a sort of den in the back where's your bed. So confronted, that's something I think we have to avoid when working there. However, this project quite particular. You see here on the left a ballpark of the San Francisco Giants. They own the big car park on the other side of the harbor, and decided to turn it into a neighborhood and put the car parks in buildings. Well, that's something spectacular, of course. They're still partly our clients. 4 architects were asked to make the first 4 blocks, and amongst us, under the guidance of Studio Gang, we made agreements that this is going to be very busy when there's a ballpark, when there's a game going on. There will be people in the streets, there will be restaurants. It's very busy. So it might be good that in our blocks, which is partly offices, partly retail, and lots of houses, we make these collective, semi-collective spaces as well between us. So one of our block, for example, had this very deep plinth and very deep tower on top of it that we had to make. So we had to, all the yellow is residential. So we immediately started to think of, let's not make this very thin den-like studios, but let's try to find some space and some room. So we started to carve out and also connect that to the other blocks. All of us did that. We made these internal connections amongst us, and even carve out more of our block, create more balconies and light. Fortunately, we were allowed to do that, to open up the block on all sides and to let the green come in as well. So that's something that, so all our inner connections and hallways and the sort of alleyways through the blocks as well. You can walk through all the buildings. Also to get more diversification in public space. And here you see even more about that operation in detail. We try to sort of turn it into this sort of strange rock, carving it out, and finding these openings for our future inhabitants. So we made the street that cuts through the retail and the first two layers of offices. It's the first three layers actually, and then goes all the way through our building. And on the rooftops there will be communal spaces, which is something luckily also in the time we built the silo dam, we had to sort of smuggle in collectivity, but nowadays it's on the menu, even in the Netherlands. Create this accessible rooftops for everybody. And very European outdoor spaces as much as possible for everyone in the project. And hopefully they can sit together and as in Amsterdam they see big boats moving in on the River Ij. Here you can listen to the ballpark atmosphere on the other side. Can't show you all the floor plans, unfortunately. I'm not allowed to, but I can give you sneak peeks into stuff like this. Yes, this area will be closed off at night. There will, as you can see here, there's a fence that will close off in the evening, quite open, but still. So this is often the give and take of when you start to create these kind of spaces. That's a consequence. It's a privately made public space. Let's be honest about that. But here you still see how also because of this operation, a lot of people will be able to look through the project and have wonderful views, and all the buildings will have, all the apartments will have balconies, and we avoided the super thin, long apartments here. Materialization, so glass fiber reinforced concrete panels that we will clad the building with. It's actually large part also affordable housing. So you might think San Francisco, isn't that the place where all the houses are crazily expensive? But that was not the ambition of the client. Really wanted to make it accessible, not just for the happy few. So that also influences, of course, the way we're going to build and construct it, and the materials that we're going to use. Last project. Do you still have some time to finish? It's the very last one. Also under construction in France, in Rennes, the capital of Brittany. Quite popular among the Brits as well, I believe. And it's not far from the center of the beautiful old historic center of Rennes. On the river La Vilaine, an old octroi tax port, and some of the buildings still remain. Again, a competition, a given envelope that we started to manipulate for views, for example, also from the people living in the in the back streets. We moved the block away a bit for 2 old buildings to suddenly be forming a little square here, adding balconies and roof terraces as much as possible, and planting, doing that almost to sort of create a kind of small landscape, and then openings as well through these blocks, so not to just close off, but make it permeable again as well. And there we placed the entrances, will get big halls that can also act as places to meet each other. And we probably will have artists decorating them. That's what we're talking about right now. You see here some of the floor plans as well. Again, everybody will get their fair share of balcony, different income groups and types, trying to avoid north-facing apartments, which is not always easy in inner city prefixed conditions. The different categories of finance inside. And we played a bit with this sort of carving out and this landscaping here by adding, by making a gradient of different ceramic tiles, going up and upwards, becoming much lighter to the top. You see here one of these openings, not very clear in this image, and how that works to get people through to the water. And the connection with this new little square that we can form, and another opening as well through the block in the evening. We even have some light tiles that we have added, because it's also a place with a cafe where people will go at night, need a nice atmosphere. And this was in autumn, actually gone much farther. And I'm very happy to, so this is a bit the evolution that we are making in our thinking, and we try to apply. Less floor plans, maybe, less rigorous floor plans towards the end. Gets more and more important to see maybe if we can draw these smaller floor plans in such a way that they can be connected maybe at some point again, when people want to have 2 houses or connect to each other, which is something particular we could introduce as architects to make sure that this is possible, that you can always connect houses again. Maybe it's an evolution. Maybe it's just a development. I don't know. Maybe you can tell me what you think of it. But it's always in this game, like I said, car, garden, house, green, outdoor space, window size. And optimize the floor plans, of course, as much as possible. Well, thank you, everybody.
Nathalie, thank you so much. That was absolutely a delight. And to see the projects assembled together in a trajectory in that way is so illuminating. I know there will be lots of people who have questions and will wish to participate in the discussion. But perhaps just to start it out, I spent about 5 years trying to spend part of my year in The Hague and part of my year in London, and one of the things that struck me was the sort of, the sense of moral order, particularly in The Hague, but perhaps in the Netherlands more generally. And so there's a sense of regularity to things. And seemingly almost as a response to that, the office has pursued a trajectory of individual variation against an overwhelming moral order. If I were to propose that as a kind of provocative starting point, let's just counterpose for a moment one of the famous stories from London, where Neve Brown famously in his first project designed all 5 houses the same after consulting with clients about their individual and particular needs. So where is the fundamental benefit of this diversity located? Now, the reason why I put it that way is because on the one hand, we might say that indeed the sense of common moral order still sort of survives in the Netherlands in a very strong way. And it's almost as though it becomes a framework for that individuality. Whereas in a way, the Neve Brown's sort of sense of this was, well, you can have the same spatial framework and your life is diversified in other ways, through your own personal nuance. In so much of the work that you were showing, there's this sort of nice balance between the sort of the sense of a molar proposition where you still see the integrity of the overall, even though you know that what's driving the individual places is a sense of minute variation. But can you sort of make a claim for what the fundamental value of that variation is?
Well, I would say, of course, is always a group of people who just get assigned to houses after being on waiting list for many, many, many years. So I would say those houses have to be good and suitable for many people, and of a good basic quality. Totally agree. Yeah. And you never know where you might end up under those circumstances. But we're also part of something bigger, and that's, we only have to look out the window in Rotterdam. Tower after tower after tower is emerging. And I'm seeing actually that the range of typological differences is actually in a certain way narrowing down, especially under under market forces, because, maybe there's not enough choice. So let's say we also see it as an obligation to add into the mix. It's not the floor plan itself, but other aspects that you can still add variation in the cityscape and give people a choice of in another sense. What type of building do I want to live? Is there a certain interaction even in the tallest building where anonymity is always it's often said is can be a big problem. Can we find other ways to provoke interactions between people as an extension of their daily life? You could say, and even maybe as a possible extra retreat close to your home. It feels like it's of you, but it's made for together. And it's also because the margins you often get more and more into sort of urban envelopes that you will have a difficulty in fitting out with the most ideal home. So I think it's a matter of offering something to choose from. It's about having the idea, okay, I live in a sort of anonymity, but my house is not the same as my neighbors. Or in the Salodem, it became a conversation piece between different people. Like, oh, you're living in that house. You have a different view on the outside world. Is it important? Maybe it's not maybe a primary. How do you say that? Primal need? No. The first need is a good house and a flexible house. But I find it incredibly difficult also to have with clients a discussion about movable walls, being able to change your house. We often try to do simple things like make sure that the fit out, the plugs and the services are not put in walls that you might actually want to delete at some point. It's about not making it's making every room worthwhile. But if you can't find it anymore inside the house, I think there's still some part of freedom that we can find in the arrangement and in the collectivity and in the interaction between different parts of the project. So. So there is this idea that there's a little bit more than just your house itself. Yeah.
Well, I know that
But why is it? Sorry, I wasn't really answering your question whether it is important or not. But I think it's. I noticed myself. When you live under densifying conditions, or when you live already under dense conditions, we have almost a moral obligation to find space inside our projects as well. That are not just everything goes to the individual, but that we bring up the street, that we bring up public life, that we bring up certain areas for possible interaction. Because it's getting more complicated on the street that we share with ever more people, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, there's also the obligation to build parks, more playgrounds, like I said, better public buildings where people can also go to at some points. I mean, until COVID came, a lot of young kids we noticed went to libraries to study nowadays. They like that. They want to get rid of, you're not allowed to be on your phone there. You have to concentrate. So inside the house, you can't find that peace of mind, apparently. And then you go outside. So that's a very fascinating thing. Or maybe you have to share the house with lots of brothers and sisters.
Yes.
And in that little space in the library, there's silence and no distraction. So that's another thing I would like to argue.
Well, I think it's interesting indeed. You've kind of been pointing in a way towards the value of a collective experience of which individual expression is the starting point. And what I find kind of interesting about that is that when one looks at all of your projects, there's a very strong sense that the overall order and integrity of the project is still very, very key. And it's as though the purpose of the individuality of each unit is partly to contribute to this larger formal order. And that's an interesting challenge in a way, is to continue to discover floor plans that can work in spite of their variation against, in a sense, the rationality that a Neve Brown might have imposed or a Mies might have imposed. And to continually discover new variations that can contribute to a greater collective experience. I think that's where the genius of the project seems to lie to me.
Yeah, and I told you in the introductory talk that we had that we're ever more forced towards this smaller and smaller apartments. Now, unfortunately, we can't have them all made with built-in furniture and all that kind of cool stuff that might make it work better, or with flexible walls, or with walls that you can take out and put back in again. Often budgets for that are even, as soon as you found budget, it's used to be taken out, let's say. Huh? So, is there room to do that? Oh, well, let's take it out and do something else with it. So in this sort of shrinking world, we have found sort of freedom in the urban layout and in the organization, and in demanding a tap at the balcony so that you can even water the plants that you want to put there, and to integrate little green areas there prefixed. So it's not just something on the render, but it's actually really feasible and there. Or maintenance strategies on some of the buildings to make sure this stuff works. And outdoor spaces. In some regions of the world, you really have to argue for that. In Asia, they say, thank you very much, rather not, it's too hot. So there you do other things again, of course. But it's fascinating to see also with our Dutch European minds working in different areas. What is normal, what is not. But it's also I'm not always very optimistic, especially when you have to work with affordable or mid-income houses, but what you can still do as an architect. Like I said, it's playing with less and less possibilities, especially when you have to produce a lot of square meters. The more the better.
Certainly in the UK, we have tremendous difficulties with this. Tom, I want to ask a question. Is there a means for people to indicate their wish to speak, or should they simply unmute if they would like to ask a question? I noticed Irene is unmuted. I know Irene probably has a comment and a question, but Tom,
unmuted.
Sure. I'll just allow everyone to unmute themselves, so if they want to ask a question, they can.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. Irene.
The hand. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I am in a way quite struck, but I should say not entirely surprised, Nathalie, with what you have just said. And I mean, when you came to speak at the AA 20 years ago, your presentation was engagingly called the new collectivity, and what I remember was a formidable sense of optimism, which has been in a way undermined in the Netherlands, 1 year after the next.
Yeah, housing prices have doubled since. Or tripled probably since I last spoke at the AA, or tripled.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there was a moment, I mean, in the 1990s, where the relationship between developers and architects, typically in Philodam project, but also in many others, one felt was going to be a creative one. And that's what actually drew so much interest, from the UK, but also other countries, in what was happening in the Netherlands in housing. And in a way, I am surprised because, I mean, to get to that point, I mean, it requires, of course, a lot of footwork and a lot of arguing and making one's case and making projects which are seductive and so on, as much as, let's say, did for Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier didn't end up building the Unité because a client suddenly got interested. I mean, likewise, there was a lot of footwork. And I was maybe slightly concerned that Netherlands, which has such a wonderful history of building housing for 120 years or more, nowadays seems in a way to have abandoned the fields for reasons which I must say, I mean, you have described in part, and I understand them, and I am in some way sympathetic to your conundrum. But I wonder whether architects do have, nevertheless, a responsibility to show what can be done in the field of housing. And in some ways, I am taking hope from two of the projects you showed in particular, which is the project you say Winy Maas was overseeing in the Ring in Amsterdam, which strikes me as having a lot in common with project by Jean Renaudy, and not to have, in a way, abandoned the diversity agenda. And the other one, which also has a strong element of optimism, is the one in Almere. Though, obviously, one will have to see how it goes. It's a free world. Mm-hmm. The world can continue to be free.
Well, Irene, that's actually also two projects where budget was less of a problem, one could say. So let's say an abundance of space and high-end apartments. So it could go to the finesse of the idea. So let's say my worry doesn't lay per se on the outer edges of the possibilities, but more at the very middle where most is made. The housing corporations have left the building in the Netherlands, more or less. They're not building a lot of new projects, and they're the ones that are hiring contractors now instead of architects often. So that's kind of worrisome. And and also the conditions have changed in terms of the urban context. and sprawl that we're also experiencing, I think. And indeed, we had very mature clients who were very developed in their thinking about floor plans as well. We also work with minimum budgets to the maximum possibilities, like in the Wozoco building. But we did work with clients who reinvested when we found the budget was fixed. When we found something, we could use it, let's say. Now it's basically, yes, as architects, we have a role, but we're often left out of the budget calculations, for example. So we're a bit in the blind sometimes. So that means that all the ideas have to be sort of intrinsically brought into the project. Yes, the responsibility that we have, indeed, as architects. But it's not necessarily meaning that when you find room or space, houses are paid per square meter. So there the problem starts already. For example, I mean, the people who buy or rent the house will do that also. Depending on how big the house is, so that's already a complicated factor. I'm not saying we should give up, but I must say sometimes that it's very important to think about what the role of the architect can still be in projects when you make housing. Absolutely, yeah. So, and there's absolutely a responsibility towards public space, how you make configurations, how you densify, how your arrangements and areas, and urban planning aspects of projects. Like I said, it is maybe still like what the certain freedom we found in the 90s in the floor plans and in the organization is now more found in the configurations and in the urban layouts. And there's also architects who actually just started for themselves to be developers in the Netherlands who are developing their ideas. So they just create a product and then they try to get that built. So that means dedication to a certain type of house, or a certain idea in architecture, which is a strategy nowadays that you find among architects as well. Like you are convinced of a certain idea, and then you will just try to find your own plot, your own clients to make that work. But maybe the Netherlands also starts to look a bit more like the rest of the world in a certain way, whereas in other areas they did the reverse thing. So. But I think a lot of experiment took place in the world of housing corporations in the Netherlands. And like I said, they are largely absent nowadays. They are returning slowly, but so that's maybe something you have witnessed also.
I noticed there's a question from Nayeli Halindo, one of our former students. Nayeli, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you so much, Nathalie. Very interesting lecture. You're inspiring as a woman and as a practitioner. So my question is, now that working from home has become the new norm and perhaps a new way of life moving forward to avoid commuting and all these extras, will the home office space be considered essential in the design of small housing units as the ones that you've been mentioning, like from 50 square meters to 70 square meters? I guess, the question is like, how do you envision separating these domestic activities and work activities in the same housing space, especially in these small housing units?
Yeah, that's why, indeed. I'm in the process in many projects of having to shrink houses, so that's a very sad development, I think. So I still hope also that a lot of people in the Netherlands will be able that each person in the house has its own room. The irony, of course, is that exactly these collective spaces that we also try to create are now also more difficult to access because of COVID, precisely because of that. So you could say that the communal areas, now also have a complicated factor. So I always hope that in the, like I said, making better libraries, seeing them more as communal spaces, neighborhood centers, that would be the, let's say, where the air can get out and where you have this sort of extra areas in the city when we all have to live much more together. I am glad that in our projects, in offices, we are fighting for openable windows, that we even in workspaces and office spaces also create these gardens and rooftops and balconies and openable stuff everywhere. So natural ventilation, for example, is important. But you are absolutely right. We have to find a way to get out of this discussion of paying per square meter and therefore having to make apartments ever smaller and smaller. Discussion with our clients. This is a kind of vicious cycle we have landed into, and I'm not going to say that we're drawing as we speak already different floor plans. They just don't have to become too small, the houses that we are making, and we have to be very careful with this bedroom, kitchen, living room, den-like situations. Mm-hmm. I also think we somehow at some point gave up on kitchens as well. There's usually now placed in the room, which is already debatable in a certain way. But I can assure you all these battles are being fought by many architects, not just me. But it's hard. So therefore alternative strategies have to be made. Like I said, I still have this belief that we can find it in the collective areas as well. So where we try to make these rooftop terraces, for example. Mm-hmm. The fact that you have an outdoor space becomes more and more important, but also close to your house. And I haven't been talking about city planning today, but I definitely think lots of cities can't just endlessly add housing and not build at the same time big parks or move out the cars as much as possible. So it's a very complex question. And I think sometimes living in a smaller house can be bearable and acceptable if at the same time in your neighborhood, near your house, you can find other ways and other places as well. But I'm not talking about total lockdowns here, as you might understand. But I still want to consider that as an anomaly. Sorry, and not as a forever given. But I think if you can't get out of your front door and be overrun by cars, you are also in a kind of lockdown, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So,
interesting, because you're making the case that housing and urbanism
undistinguishable,
more closely related than they have been until now. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like in the Masterplan in Amsterdam that I showed you, where we actually carefully say each house also has an outdoor, each apartment building also has this plot, this neighboring plot, and there might be a typology together. So it's not just the building, but also the immediate surroundings that are part of our idea. And if there is no space, we try to find it in the buildings by making cuts and openings and light holes and roofs accessible. So it's about using every possible surface of a project somehow and make it usable and accessible. That's the sort of maximalization, optimization, multiplication that I think is very important. Also for other reasons, of course, because we need more green and we have to produce energy. I mean, we're only just begun of what buildings have to be able to perform. Space, energy, I don't know. You can just go on and on. The list is getting longer. I wish I had the problems that the Corbusier has, let's say.
Indeed. You know, it's interesting because the argument seems to be tending in the direction, if I follow on Irene's point, that not only are housing and urbanism interlinked, but the greater degree that you emphasize the expressivity of each individual unit and the way in which it might connect up to further amenities in the area. This kind of interesting dynamic puts a new kind of burden on the inhabitant to be part of a collective aspiration through the cultivation of a personal life, the cultivation of a style of living. Now, that burden may be precisely what we welcome most, but it also is a burden. And I think one of the things that we will be wanting to ask ourselves is, what is the nature of that balance between provision and the cultivation of a civic responsibility or a private responsibility, personal responsibility? This sort of negotiation of responsibilities is something I think we're looking at quite closely across a number of projects in our program. So to see in a way that what I find really most important about MVRDV is that implicitly throughout the design, these questions are being posed as being at the heart of that sort of question of a series of thresholds between indoor and outdoor, or the public and the private, or the served and the serving.
Yeah. I think we, in a way, we're all children of Herman Hersberger here, of course, also. But in a way, we expanded it to the whole city, you could say.
Yeah.
So, as we are often also master planners, we also have collaborations with other architects in our schemes, and we have to think beyond us designing the building. Potentially, it's the end users designing it. So, also coming back to Nayeli's question, I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if people can have much more influence, only temporarily even, on the layout of their apartment? So ideally, you could rearrange things a bit more easy inside the house, and our systems are not yet completely ready for that. But I hope with the idea about, for example, circular building and this transformability of buildings, we start to develop new catalogs and new building methodologies that make changeability a much more common possibility from the users to the city or society as a whole. So if I want to show my optimistic side, I think we might be at an interesting moment in time where building change and responsibilities are redefined because of the origins of materialization and of hybridization. Roles can differ and change. Positions can change, and then maybe finally we can really make buildings that people can customize more easily, and it becomes more common, that we then therefore also can restore and repair more easily, or make them demountable. So in that way of thinking. But I've also noticed, and I've been looking at it from many different angles in my professional career, how fixed some ways of working in our industry, in our building industry are. And it's up to architects maybe to sometimes be part of finding a loose end and being able to pull that end to its fullest and untangle and unring. And also I always believe in collaboration between architects. So especially in plans where we are working with different architects inside our schemes or together as neighbors, we've also been able to find, let's say, possibilities that designers can find by simply interacting in a different way with each other in or maybe rigid plans or rigid circumstances.
No, it's absolutely right. I mean, these ideas need to be collectivized, through various means and working together, and whether it's via project or via reflections on policy. I think what you say is very important, Nathalie.
I think knowing a lot about structure and technical aspects and financial aspects certainly helps. So I think we have to start to think much more like doctors and whatever lawyers that have to continuously educate themselves. So I advise every young architect listening to open up and to realize that probably the ways we are building are also going to change and are changing and should be changing. Otherwise, we just get stuck into the same loops altogether.
Yes. In fact, as you were lecturing, Nathalie, I found myself thinking that there was an additional submerged lecture on the importance of reflection on structure, on materials, as part of the sequence of projects where you were describing.
There's a lot of structural issues there that we are dealing with, indeed. I haven't shown them because I always want to show so many projects, but maybe sometimes it should take more time to also go into the exact ways of working, because irregular structures or cantilevers or greening that should survive actually requires technical solutions, often within the limits of budgets, that are... it's not just aesthetical aspects or spatial aspects, but a lot of, indeed, design development structurally, technically, that has to coincide with that. Because if you see it's not regular, then you probably can imagine it's not regular. So being able to do that,
So I think there are
some negotiation skills and basic knowledge, indeed. And of course, digitalization is of great help here. So we can do now things in that wouldn't be able before we made use of digital tools. And I think. I hope at some point that we can. I sometimes say that maybe the future is that we design tools rather than make the designs. So that means that people can pick up part of the design process and take over and use elements of that. That might be another lecture.
Indeed,
to develop separately.
There are several theses developed or available inside your lecture today, things that students can pick up on and hopefully pursue further, research further. And in that sense, Nathalie, it's been an inspiration. So I think you've... If 2021 is meant to start with greater hope than 2020 allowed us, this has been a great lecture with which to start, because in spite of your experience of a narrowing range of opportunities in relation to the building industry, I think you've given us a pretty good reason to think that there are still lots of things to explore and research and learn and pursue. So I have to say I appreciate that hugely.
Yeah, and it's worth it, because as René also suggested, often we do things that nobody ever asked for us to do. So it really starts with your own ideas and your own principles and your own positioning. It's never underestimate that, because otherwise, especially in housing, you will be down a very dead-end road very soon if you don't use that personal positioning.
Indeed. Well, Nathalie, I know we've...
Invite you and not wait for another 23 years.
Indeed, yes. Well, we'll have to make this a more regular occurrence. My co-director, George Fiore, was called away for an emergency and had to go, but he sent me a message, Nathalie, to say thank you very much, and that he was fascinated by what you showed. And I know from all of us in housing and urbanism and the AA more widely, we're so delighted that you could take the time. I know it's a busy time of year, and I want to thank your team as well. Marlene has been great, and in helping get this organized. So thank you very much.
It was lovely talking to you, because I always have to sort of reorganize my thoughts when I have to give these. Especially for challenging audiences like the AA group. So thank you for that as well, because it made me think, it also helps me to reorganize my thoughts every now and then and see where things are going or not going for that matter. Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
good. Let's keep this cross fertilization alive then.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, Nathalie, and Tom Parks. Thank you so much for hosting and organizing this so well on our side, and hope to see you all soon, and wish you all a very successful 2021. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.